How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 126, and today I have got a very special guest for you. I last spoke to this guy back in episode 55. He's one of the world's top MMA trainers, as well as the strength and conditioning coach for an American top team. Today I am joined by the one and only Phil Daru. How are you doing?
Man, that's a great introduction. Thank you. I appreciate that, bro. I'm honored to be on your podcast. Trust me.
Appreciate you jumping on. Like I say, for anyone that didn't have it or hasn't listened to the first time, me and Phil chatted. A really great episode, and from there, following the content that Phil puts out there, is really beneficial and informative information that's put out there. So, what have you been up to? What's been happening in your world since we last spoke?
Well, as of right now, we have homeschool. So my son is asking for headphones. Oh, okay. All right. Well, he's asking me some questions. But anyway, this is what happens when you don't have school. No, everything else is pretty solid. We have fights coming up, like Edson's fighting. We have Michael Davis fighting on the UFC card of May 16th. So, getting those guys ready, keeping the groups obviously very small, making sure we stay sanitary with everything, cleaning up. The great thing is I have two gyms that I own, so we're not on quarantine where we're confined into our house, so I get to go and train. And, everything's still moving. I actually opened up in the middle of this whole thing. I ended up actually opening up two gyms. So I opened up one gym. And I was saying, okay, well, I wanted to make this kind of more fitness-oriented, more general pop. We're going to be working on boot camps and things like that. And then the other gym is a sports complex that I'm actually going in partnership with Mo Vaughn, who was a baseball player, Hall of Fame baseball player. But that won't be done until the end of, or I should say the middle of June. Yeah. So looking forward to that because that's where I'm going to be training most of the athletes at.
Nice. And has there been, because obviously you mentioned there, a couple of your athletes have got fights coming up. Is there any athletes that you've been working with that their fights have maybe been cancelled, or has there been any disruption? Yeah,
there's probably about 6 of them that, fights have gotten canceled. And the great thing about the program is that, I allow them to still maintain their GPP, their fitness. Yeah. And because of that, we just kind of coast them in. So if ever they have like a fight on short notice, like they probably will have, all we need is about maybe 4 weeks to really get them peaking and taper off so that they can go in there ready to go.
Nice. And what about your own training and the other side of your business as well? Have you had a little bit more time to, work on some new products or work on your own training a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, as of right now, I got the torn ACL, so I am just working around that. I'm not doing any obviously plyometrics or anything or lateral force movements or rotation, but I can work in the sagittal plane. So I've been doing a lot of box squats and deadlifts and things like that to get my strength back up. As far as projects, we just launched the Body Armor program, which is a body weight program, an 8-week body weight program. So I'm excited about that because that's actually helping people right now, because they can't go to the gym. So we're getting, and it's 50% off, and I'm going to keep it 50% off until all this clears up, so people can get it without having to worry about money and everything like that. So, and then on top of that, I'm just doing a lot of content. I'm actually put together, just launched the podcast too. So I guess I launched 2 gyms and a podcast in the pandemic. So, I mean, it gave me a little bit more time to kind of hone in on those attributes and things that I'm doing. But, I would say that plus constant YouTube channel videos, those are the ones that are really giving me most of my time. And then I get to spend time with my family, which is awesome too.
Yeah. I know I've spoken to a couple of coaches that, have been sometimes travel a lot. And I think obviously a lot of people's sometimes says they don't have time for a lot of things, whereas now time's a little bit of a luxury to be able to spend with family and work on different things, which is cool. And obviously, I've seen that the content that you're putting out there, obviously recovering from your injury. How's recovery going?
It's going well. I haven't been able to get the surgery. So, right now I'm just trying to strengthen up everything, trying to strengthen the shit out of my hamstrings, my calves, even though I don't have any calves. Trying to build those things up, and just trying to stay strong, man. The most part is just trying to get the stimulus and making sure I'm doing proper loading and working through the biomechanics that I need to not hinder, or I should say, cause any more damage to the knee, which it shouldn't be. It's not a big issue, So I'm ready to go.
Yeah, nice. And for anyone who might not have listened to the first time that we chatted, or know your background and how you got involved in the American top team and working with all these different fighters and different athletes, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Yeah, so I guess I started training and weightlifting to get ready for football. Really, was American football, and it wasn't really the fact of like me wanting to be a strength and conditioning coach. It was more just me trying to get ready for my own training and for my own practices and games and things like that. And obviously, I wanted to be big. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to, look the part too. So started training at about 13, 14 years old. I drug all of my teammates into my garage. We started lifting there, and I was starting to put together little workouts and exercises that I thought would fit. I didn't have a bench, so we automatically did floor pressing. Yeah. I didn't know what floor pressing was at the time. I was just like, man, we don't have a bench, but we can probably bench on the floor. Let's just try that. So we were doing floor presses, bent over rows, and I had a pretty good understanding of it because my grandfather actually brought me to the gym when I was like 13. He snuck me in, and my grandfather was like 72 years old. He benched over 275 for like reps. So I was like, okay, I got some genetics on my side. And then I started to look into Joe DeFranco and Louis Simmons and really started to get into that. And that kind of brought me over to the Soviet method. And when I was looking in, conjugate sequencing systems and all of that, and for Kashansky, Sasorsky, Medvedev, I started to understand it a little bit better from a periodization standpoint. When I got to high school, I started to work the programming for my high school football team. Because I was like, okay, well, the coach kind of knew what he was doing, but he was a head football coach. That's all he really knew, what they did, where he went to school. And he was like, if you want to take over, because I think I had mouthed off to him at one point. I was like, this shit doesn't work. Like we were doing like linear progressions, and I remember Louis saying like, linear is terrible. So I was like, okay, well, and at the time, like I'm how like you when you learn from somebody, and when you're a young kid, that's all you know. Yeah. So that's the only thing that you have to say that it works. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now I have a little bit more perspective on things where I could have been like, yeah, linear probably could have worked for us for a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Because we were all kids. We were all new lifters. But honestly, we jumped out of the gate, and I just did a basic wave loading process. And that's when I started to understand like different waves of training and then what correlates over to the field. And then after that, once I got to college, I started to pick the brain of one of my college strength coaches. And he was like, man, and I didn't even declare a major yet. So I didn't even know what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was play football. And at the same time, I was boxing on the off season. So I was like going back and forth, and I really started to really enjoy combat sports. And I had a knack for it. I did Kempo karate, and I did a little boxing in high school. So it kind of took both sides. And then, after that, I declared my major, exercise science, and he was like, man, this is what you should be doing. You know what I mean? You love being in the weight room. You love training. You love training people. You love like giving advice. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll check it out. And then I started to understand it a little bit more. And then I started really breaking it down from the micro level and getting back to the basics of science. And then I started to bridge the gap and put it together. And when I got out of college, I went straight into MMA because there was no boxing gyms around my area, but luckily there was an MMA gym called American Top Team. So I found Dean Thomas, who is one of my first coaches. He actually was on my podcast, and we talk about like the first time we met, which is really funny because I kind of just ran up on him and I was like, hey, I want to fight. And he was like, like he's a UFC fighter too, and I didn't care. I didn't know too much about Dean. I knew about him through ATT, but I didn't know that he was like a UFC fighter. He was actually in the Ultimate Fighter at the time. So, so I took a class. I liked it. Went from there, did some amateur fights, went pro, opened up my own gym at the same time I turned pro. Probably not the greatest idea, The great thing is that I had a good understanding of business.
Yeah.
Not a great understanding, don't get me wrong. Like I wasn't a business major, but I learned through other people. Like I had another mentor when I started, strength and conditioning for MMA, Tony Montgomery, who is a monster. Like obviously, if you guys don't know who Tony Montgomery is, check him out. But started with him really young before he blew up and got, sponsored by Elite FTS and all that. And, so I started training with him, and that was the first time like I got to see like a true strength gym where it was like strongman equipment and powerlifting, powerlifting equipment and all the stuff I seen with Joe DeFranco and Louis in that West Side. And I was like, man, this is all the same stuff. And so I was almost at home. From there, I took that approach and put it into my own gym when I was able to open it up, ran some boot camps, and did some athletic training with a lot of the guys. So I trained like high school, some youth football, and then boot camps for general public. And then also my teammates would come in. So that's when I started to understand it from that perspective of MMA. And I was like, okay, there's multiple bioenergetic demands of the sport. We have to make sure we can get those, molded together and make sure that we are, one, increasing performance, but also mitigating fatigue, because that's a big issue. And a lot of my guys, even myself, would overtrain ourselves. So understanding proper periodization protocols, understanding the neuromuscular system and the central nervous system primarily, to, again, like I said, get the most out of the training and not let the training get the most out of us. So, I mean, and then fast forward from that, I retired from the sport of MMA due to concussions. I had about 8 concussions. Probably wasn't the greatest idea for me to keep going on. And actually still was like, it took me to go to a neurologist for him to be like, yo, you need to chill out. And finally, I called it. And I was like, you know what? I have a better opportunity to be a better coach. Yeah. I'm very selfless. And that's what a coach needs, as opposed to an athlete who needs to be selfish. And that's not, it's not who I am. Obviously, I do things for people because I want to, not because I have to. But at the end of the day, I was like, you know what, this is going to be better for me in the future. So I said, I asked Dean, I said, do you have anybody that you want me to work with down at American Top Team? Because I'm not training, but I want to be a part of the sport. And he goes, yeah, you might be in luck. Get your resume together and come down to Top Team, see if we can get you going. So I got my resume together. I had my wife print it out. I sent it down there, drove about 90 minutes to American Top Team. And then the first day I trained Tisha Torres, Dustin Poirier, Hector Lombard, King Wall, and Dia Davis. And he's a pro boxer. He's Howard Davis's son. So I trained all of those guys and kind of threw into the fire. They didn't know I was going to train them. I actually just got together with them when I got there, and I was just like talking to them because they knew I was a fighter. And I was like, yeah, I came up with Dean Thomas and this and that. And they recognized me because I used to come and spar like every so often. But they didn't know me as a coach. So when I was like, all right, guys, let's go, they were kind of looking at me like, you coaching us? And I was like, yeah, man, I'm trying to get the new spot. And he was like, they were like, oh, okay. So Dustin in the beginning really, I haven't told anybody this, I don't think, but not at least on podcast. Dustin really didn't like me in the beginning.
Right.
Like he liked me as a person, but he didn't like me as a coach. And this is why, because I was a little bit more outgoing. I was a little bit more like in your face, and for his type of mentality, he doesn't need that, and that's one thing that I could say that I really understood from, coaching perspective, is that when I went into ATT, remember, I'm used to coaching like general pop, high school football. So like, I gotta be intense. I gotta be motivational, and they don't need that. Like they're motivated themselves. So Dustin, I remember them telling me, Dustin was like, man, this fucking guy, I don't want him yelling at me anymore. Right? And so now, like, I know these individuals to the T's, and it gives me more opportunity to understand them. And if somebody new comes in, I know I need to take the time to really understand who they are and look at their personality and then mold my coaching around their personality. And that's been helpful a lot. And that's what I do with my mentorship program. I have like 350 coaches around the world now. And the great thing about that is I get to tell them, like, don't fuck up. Don't do the things I did. You know what I mean? And the best thing that you can do really is open up those lines of communication and really show, that you care, but also have that understanding so that you don't go ahead and negatively affect the training process, because you're not communicating well, or you're not throwing in proper cues, or you're making them feel uncomfortable in certain ways, and we don't want that. So yeah, so fast forward to that, I got the job finally. Actually took me about a month and a half for them to actually put me on as a full-time coach. I was doing it for free for about a month and a half and driving 90 minutes. Yeah. And meanwhile, I still had a full-time gym that I owned up north. Yeah. So I was driving back and forth, and finally got the job. And then after I got the job, I kind of was like, okay, I need to make a change with the gym. So I had 11,000 square feet in Port St. Lucie, Florida, which is like I said, where I started MMA. And I was like, man, this isn't going to work, man. It's too big of a gym. There's too many people that I have to look after. I had 7 trainers that was under me. I had a manager. I had, so it was a lot. And I was like, man, I really have this newfound, I don't know what I would say, excitement, I guess, for what I was doing, because I was coaching the guys that I trained and that I look up to in certain ways, like Andre Arlovsky, Junior Dos Santos, all these guys. I'm like, man, listen, the only way I'm going to be really good and really hone in on my skills with this is if I go full in, I'll go all in with it. So I sold the gym. I opened up a small facility about right next to my house, about 10 minutes from my house, for like personal training and things like that. And then for my own stuff, like I can't go to a public gym. Like I really can't. I can't go to we call it the chrome and carpet gym. Can't go to that. So I always have to have my own gym, even if I had to put it in my garage. But I opened up my own gym for other trainers and the trainers that were with me before, so they can train their people. And then I was full time there. So that's been about 5 years now. And now I'm to the point where now I'm down south, and I opened up a facility. And then I'm opening up another mega facility, a sports complex with Movan for the athletes. So we have a fitness gym, and then we have the sports complex, which is going to be fun.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And when you're saying there about learning from your mistakes, I think that does come with experience. And I think sometimes, especially when you mentioned there with your mentorship program, I think sometimes people have to make those mistakes and then think, all right, okay, so I can be better for the next the next time it comes around. And I know when we last spoke, once the episode had stopped recording, we had a little bit of a chat afterwards, and from there, I know it sort of helped me try and pick different things from different areas of coaching and strength and conditioning, and try and put them towards something that I can use. Because I know obviously in the last episode and what you chatted about there, quite a lot of experience in different sports in powerlifting, playing football, and then going into MMA, and that's kind of one of the areas that I wanted to pick your brains on for this podcast, which is when it comes to MMA and combat sports, there is a strength element there, but obviously we want to be powerful and explosive, but maybe being able to control that a little bit more, and sometimes if you go too far down that route of getting maybe too strong, or what is too strong. So kind of the first question that I wanted to ask you is, when it comes to building strength for an MMA athlete, what does that look like, and what are you actually looking for, and what are the levels of strength that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, we could put a number on it, but everybody's different. I'm just looking for relative strength, right? How well they can move their weight, their own body weight, and then also, how much absolute strength they can have to increase force production. The thing is, we're not looking at it from a strength or speed perspective. We're looking at it from a slow to fast perspective. So if I keep working them in those slow zones, they're going to end up just staying slow and strong. The goal really is not to increase just that. We want to make sure that they're not just power lifters or lifters in general. We're trying to transfer that over into a higher rate of force development. So working on both sides of the force velocity curve is very important for me. That's why I run a conjugate system, and that's why we do max effort and dynamic effort. Now, the max effort from Louis' perspective is a 1 rep max, and a lot of those guys, if they don't have the proficiency to move weight, I don't have them do 1-rep maxes. Or what I will do is maximal isometrics, or the Hoffman method, where we'll go dynamic into isometric. We'll pull one pin to another pin, pull for a second or two, and then relax, do it again. And that's going to really work on explosive strength and also speed strength if you put the adequate amount of load on there from a percentage perspective. But when you're talking about maximal force production, isometrics is the key, in my opinion, because you have that 15 degree of strength that you can get from, you know, wherever you're pulling from or wherever you're pressing from, whatever it is. So with that, we do a lot of that to maintain strength when we get closer to the fight. Also, because of the fact that it's less chance of injury, the main thing that I want to make sure that we're not doing is we're not doing any harm to them. So, you know, with that being said, I got to make sure I put my guys in the best position to, you know, increase their strength, increase their speed, without hindering any type of injury going further. Because let's face it, their sport specificity is MMA, so they got to be on the mats and in the cage training. So that's maximal effort in itself. So for me, you know, we even we'll do like a 5-3-1 wave, where I'll go 5 reps the 1 week, 3 reps the next week, 1 week wave, and then we'll wait back, or we'll deload if they're in camp. We'll deload, and then we'll go into our peaking phase, which is basically contrast sets mixed in with isometrics and dynamic movements. So I've been working with that for, I want to say, a year and a half now, and we've been seeing tremendous results with it. And that's really what I call it the condensed conjugate model, because it's a 2-day split. If we do have 3 days, well, then basically what I'll do is I'll take whatever the fighter lacks, whether it be strength or power, and then I'll work in those specific zones for those 2 days, and then the 1 day will be predicated towards the one that they already have, and we can just maintain from that perspective. So it's really about what do we need to maintain and what do we need to bring up, and then some of that may be flip-flop depending on where they're at in camp. So off camp, right? Let's say, for instance, I want to build a base, right? So I got to get strong in that perspective. I got to build neuromuscular coordination. I got to build, you know, the right way to understand how to move weight underneath heavier loads or medium to heavy loads, and do that by repetition. So strength endurance, and what I mean by strength endurance is anything above 1 rep is going to be strength endurance based, right? In muscular endurance, you're looking at 15, 20 rep sets, things like that. And that's good too, because that's going to increase local muscular endurance, buffering capacity. And that's good when people have, like, a lot of my guys, let's say, for instance, they don't have a long time in weightlifting. They don't have a weightlifting background. They haven't really trained strength training at all. Or they're like a Muay Thai guy, or let's say a jiu-jitsu guy, where they really haven't strained, or they weren't in those close quarter positions where they had to be strong, like wrestlers do. So the wrestlers, in my opinion, have the best muscular endurance, because they have to have that, and they have the best repeated power endurance too. With the Muay Thai guys, they're very aerobic driven, because if they have that background, and nowadays everybody's mixed, but for the most part, if you see some guy that takes to one art over the other, you'll see the differences in the bioenergetic demands, like the energy systems that they acquired for that particular style. And usually they have a large aerobic capacity, right? So because of how they train, they run a ton. So they increase their oxygen utilization. But when it comes down to peripheral fatigue, or when I say this, I mean local muscular fatigue, my bad. And when that happens, then you're like, okay, well, now we need to work on this. Now we need to work on the isometric tension. Now we need to work on strength endurance in those particular movement patterns, so we can allow them to be strong in all different ways. So yeah, so again, it really just depends on the person. And I know that if I'm going to do a program based upon the person, where it needs to be, you have a system in place, but it's subjective to the individual. This way I can plug and paste when I need to, but everybody can train in the same group. It's just maybe one person may be doing a certain type of tempo, or certain type of rep scheme, or certain type of percentage. And one person may be doing a totally different exercise, because again, they may not have the joint prerequisites or anything like of that nature to get underneath that type of movement under load. So just kind of maneuver it a little bit, but for the most part, the basis of the system remains the same. It's just understanding the individual and making sure you're catering to their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because, especially when it comes to MMA and the different backgrounds that they might have come from in terms of training, to then come and fit within that system, you might have to change things around to what's going to be more beneficial for them. What are your thoughts on if someone's come in and they've done a little bit of training before, because sometimes the strength side of things is potentially the where people feel a lot more comfortable because they can see progress on the bar and that sort of stuff. What are the signs or things that you're looking for if people have done maybe a little bit too much strength training and when it actually becomes a little bit detrimental to their performance?
Yeah, so I got a guy by the name of Jake Boswick. He's actually from London.
Right.
So you should know. Yeah, so he's a beast, man, and strong as ever. The thing with him is that when I can understand if they're stronger than they are fast, I usually run a velocity profile, so I can measure that out through that. And also just seeing how strong they are from their 1 rep max. Like Jake, if I know Jake can hit, a double body weight squat, a triple body weight deadlift, and a 1.5 body weight bench, or any type of pressing variation, whether it be a floor press or incline press or whatever, I know we're good. We're set there. Now I need to bring up other attributes, because a lot of the times, if a guy is very strong, they usually lack the conditioning, right? They usually lack that elasticity. They usually lack the fast amortization phases. So what I need to do now is, now that Jake has the strength, definitely has the strength base, now we need to work on those higher velocity sets. That's why we got to work on speed strength and explosive strength in those percentages, so that we can bring up, that other side of what he needs, but still maintain his strength that he has. So that's what I was saying, is maintaining and bringing things up depending on the person and where they're at in camp. So I don't want him also to lose his fitness. So we are going to be doing things like sled dragging and higher rep, like marching. I have a belt squat, so I do a lot of belt squat marching. Those types of things are good for restoration, and also, again, muscular endurance and keeping that base of work capacity. So, if I see an athlete that has that strength capacity, that has that ability to produce force, because of the fact that they're putting weight on the bar, I can really see that. But from the profile perspective, if they're moving the weight, they're moving 100%, 90% at a lower percentage, or I should say at the percentage and at the meters per second that they need to, then that's good. If they are moving weight slower at the lower weights, let's say 50 to 80%, right? The lower percentage weights. If those are slower from a meters per second and what it needs to be, then we know we need to get that person faster.
So because on that, because obviously, when you look at some of the athletes and some of the fighters out there who have this massive amount of strength and power, that's going to be part of their game, if you like. And how do you put that across? Because sometimes, if the strength training sometimes gets taken away a little bit or reduced, sometimes it might be a thinking of, I need to make sure that I keep strength and not lose anything. How do you put that across as a coach?
You know what? I don't really get a whole lot of that. Like, even Jake understands that I know what I'm doing when it comes to that, because they trust me. So I don't really get a whole lot of that anymore. When I started, they were like, man, am I going to lose my mobility, or am I going to lose my – they didn't even know what mobility was, but they lose my ability to move. And I was telling them, like, no, because then that's when you have to educate the athlete. But educate them in a means of how they can understand it, not fucking do all this jargony words, because they're going to look at you like you got 3 heads. So you have to break that down a little bit more, so that they can understand it, and just understand, like, let them know that what we're doing here is going to make you better as a whole. And I kind of put it in play, especially with the MMA guys, because there's so many different, there's so many different factors, so many different moving parts. And I'm like, okay, well, let's put it like this, right? If you were training your boxing and you were phenomenal at boxing, but you sucked on the ground, if you go do your groundwork, but you maintain your boxing every once or twice a week, but you're fucking killing it on the mats, what do you think is going to happen? You're going to get better as a whole. So that's the same concept. You're already strong. Let's improve your power production. Let's improve your rate of force. Let's improve your speed, because that's going to make you a better overall athlete. And that they understand, because you put it and you reframe it for what they know, which is fighting.
Yeah. Do you think that's where sometimes, depending on the level of the athlete, that's where sometimes they go wrong a little bit, and the athletes that can kind of understand that and or have a better understanding can start to see, you know, more progress in their performance and start climbing up a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, the understanding of training in general is going to be better for them. And usually the guys that are like the veterans, they know it. They've been in it for a while. The younger kids, you know, I don't know. I mean, I get a good mix. At ATT, it's hard. It's hard to say, because everybody's elite. You don't step in that gym, and you know, if you're not like the elite of wherever you're at. So when I first started, though, however, yeah, it was kind of the fact of like, all right, well, you guys got to understand that this is going to be beneficial for you in the long run, not just right now, not even for this just this camp. I always like to think in like 4-year increments, you know what I mean? Because you got like high school, college, Olympics, same concept. So I have like 4 years to really build up. In all actuality, a true fighter making it to the highest level and their peak of their performance in their career usually takes about 8 to 10 years. Some people, obviously, not so long. Some people longer. But usually the general consensus is 10 years. So you got 10 years to really develop an athlete, a fighter. And again, like I always say, athletes can be fighters, and fighters don't necessarily have to be athletes, right? You have different levels. If you can bridge that gap and merge the two, well, now you got a scary individual. You know, those are the guys like, you know, the John Joneses and GSPs and things like that. Those are the guys that are super athletic, but also very talented as a fighter and a martial artist. Again, you have some athletes. I talked about this with Dean Thomas too, because you have different sections of fighters. You have the fighter, you have the artist, you have the athlete, and then you have the competitor. Now, some of them can be hybrided. Like you have Dustin, I feel like he's a true fighter and he's a competitor. Whereas that, you know, you have like a guy not like Walt Harris, who's actually fighting soon. He's a complete athlete. You know, it's just, the guy's insane. He was 260 pounds and jumped on a 62-inch box with a one step. I was like, okay, we're pretty good here when it comes down to that. Now we just got to improve on your mobility and your conditioning, and then we'll be set. You know, as far as mobility, I mean active and range. I'm not talking about movement. Yeah. You know, so those types of guys. But yeah, I mean, I guess that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of, you know, moves nicely onto the next point. And, you know, sometimes that you can have the combinations of, you know, the fighter and the athlete, but sometimes like what we've touched on, people are athletes and fighters can have a massive amount of strength and power, but then sometimes you know, that power or that strength sometimes is probably raw is the good word. And then sometimes, you know, as they're coming in, like what you mentioned about ATT, when they're coming in and it's the elite level, trying to be able to control that strength and that power. And how do you know, when it comes to the training program, because when they're sparring or they're practicing their skills, they can hone that in a little bit more. But sometimes when it comes to the gym, which is obviously there to enhance their performance or, you know, help improve their performance, how do you go about coaching, or what's your strategies in terms of controlling that strength and that power, so that when they actually go for their performance, that everything's, you know, firing on all cylinders?
Yeah. So again, now, when you mean by control, do you mean, you know, with movement, or do you mean just in programming per se?
Probably a little bit of both, because what I find quite interesting is that sometimes when we start talking about power exercises, people might be going through, yes, there's throws and slams and jumps that you can do, but then some people might think that they need to be using a barbell, and because they've got that, you know, that pure strength, that they can maybe get away with not putting all their energy into the right movement that they're going to benefit a little bit more from. And then, you know, in terms of the programming side of it.
Yeah, I got you. So, I mean, again, that goes back to like context and understanding the individual. Like I said, and I talked about Jordan Shallow with the gatekeeper exercises. You know, it's just understanding the person and seeing what can they do at that particular time. There's no wrong exercises. It's just wrong prescriptions, right? There's just wrong placements. So what you want to do is you got to make sure that you, again, understand what's going on with that athlete from an assessment protocol, whether it be a mobility assessment, whether it be those gatekeeper exercises like we talked about, whether it be, you know, just watching them from a fatigue management standpoint, watching their coordination. And if they just don't have the coordination to do something, if it looks wrong, if it looks like shit, I'm going to shut it down and we'll do something that's more efficient for the athlete. So it's really about finding that efficient movement or finding that efficient exercise that's going to elicit the greatest response, because all we're really trying to do is get the stimulus. And then from that, we can cause an adaptation. But you can't, you know, put a square peg in a round hole type deal, right? You have to make sure that all things match. And there's been plenty of times where I'm like, all right, one thing may work for one athlete, and the other one's like, nope, that ain't working for you. Let's go over here and hit these landmine presses because I know you can't do an overhead press, you know, shit like that. So it's been like that for I mean, almost a decade, you know, and we cannot stop the training process. Like, you know, for the most part, these guys got to eat. So with me, it's like, all right, I can't fully become a clinician. I can't fully become a PT. I need to still work on the things I need to work on from a corrective standpoint, but I also need to make sure that I'm putting in perspective of, yes, these guys got to fight in 6 weeks. So I still need to get them ready for the fight instead of having them just do bird dogs, you know? And I know a lot of people see that and they're like, oh, well, Phil has them do bird dogs and the McGill 3. And and you got to know that I also scale that. It's not that I'm keeping them on the floor, you know, doing shit that they would do if they were getting out of surgery. I'm actually progressing that so that they can get strong, have that stability, have that mobility, and then we can enhance that strength there. But if you don't have those two, you cannot express force in the right ways.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, because especially with the content that you put out there, a lot of the throws or jumps that you might do, sometimes people will think, well, actually, that doesn't look like the most complicated or fancy exercise in the world, but like what you say there, you're trying to get that stimulus and trying to make that a little bit better. Do you think that sometimes potentially from some power exercises that are put in programs are just there because they look good and are maybe, you know, a little bit too complicated, rather than, you know, it's that thing, isn't it? You know, you've got to get the basics done properly rather than just doing something just because it looks good.
Yeah, it drives me crazy sometimes. You know, when somebody's just putting something out for Instagram or for YouTube or something like that to make it look good. And you never want to give the athlete something they can't handle, you know. And one, it's going to negatively affect their psychological state, and also you're not helping them, you're hurting them in the long run when it comes down to physical and just overall stimulus adaptations. A lot of my stuff, I try to keep it as simple as possible, because these guys aren't those, you know, and it's to a degree, because some of the athletes that I have, if they're highly athletic, then yeah, I can have a little bit of fun with them. You know, we can do some things because I can challenge them. But if they don't have that, I'm not going to have them do like a drop down box jump into a rotational twist onto another box. Like, that's not going to be what I need to do. I need to get them to learn how to land properly and then re-exert force, as opposed to doing multi-directional jumps or multi-directional movement patterns where they can't even move linear properly. You know what I mean? They can't even run in a proper gait cycle. So getting that ability to just rotate, you know, and understand rotation and understanding, you know, force displacement in lateral and linear movements, it's going to allow me to do more things in the long run. but I got to make sure that I have a baseline of readiness before we do so.
Yeah, is that a similar then sort of thought process of, because obviously you want, I know we've spoken about athletes and fighters that may have a massive amount of strength, and you want to make sure that they're powerful, but then also across the board you want to make sure that they get up to a certain point of strength that you can maintain. Is the thought process that there has to be a certain level of athleteness, if you like, or a certain level of power that they can show on the exercises that they can do, or is it just completely you'll just take it by that case by case basis?
Yeah, like I do like to see, them learn how to land, learn how to displace force. A short amortization phase would be really good. And then also having the proper strength prerequisites. So again, they have to be able, like let's say for instance, they're doing a drop jump or a depth jump. They got to be able to at least squat 1.5 times their body weight before we even start to do that. And honestly, I don't even do a whole lot of that because just the amount of force being distributed down into their joints. So I like to jump up on boxes more so than anything because they're beating themselves up anyways. But I like to see them be, as functional on two legs and as on one leg too as well. So a lot of guys that maybe, super strong bilateral, but you put them, in a single leg movement and they fall in their face. Well, that's an issue, right? So we got to make sure from an athlete standpoint, from an athleticism standpoint, they can do things in all different movements and all different patterns, unilateral, bilateral, things like that. So I wait for that, and then once I see that they are efficient in that, they can control their body, they can control their trunk. They know how to properly brace. They know how to move weight, high weight, and fast with the right technique. Then we'll go ahead and increase it there. We'll progress it.
Do you think when you're chatting there about bracing and landing and all those sort of things, do you think that's becoming a little bit more used across the board a little bit more and a little bit more widely used, rather than always those things of thinking, right, well actually we're just going to go into the gym and see what happens? Do you think that's becoming a little bit more used now?
I mean, I can't say for anybody else, but what I can say is that, yes, I totally want to make sure that everything's in line and we have that system in place. There's a lot of guys out there that are really good, that are really, helping out these fighters in the right ways. I mean, you look at the UFC Performance Institute, Bo Sandoval and Duncan French, they got everything in line there. These guys know how to train athletes. Bo's been around forever. With the Olympic training facility there, with the I think he worked as an intern when King Molawal was there. Yeah. I think it was, I want to say early 2000s or something like that. But now he's working with all of the UFC fighters, which is really good for those guys. So I think that it's making the step in the right direction. But we still have a lot to go. We still need to look at it. Also, I'm looking for more testing parameters and assessments that are going to highly correlate over to the sport, just like you would see in football or soccer or anything like that. We want to get to a point where we can, identify true transferability to the sport with, assessment protocols. And once we get to that level, and there's ways around. They're trying to come up with a combine type style for the UFC, and if that does happen, then we'll start to see more things there. Like I'll start to integrate more. Like right now, I start to integrate more of biomotor abilities for that particular athlete, for that particular game plan, or for that particular style of athlete, whether they be a wrestler, a BJJ guy, a boxer, something like that, so that I can actually see. Okay, is this really going to work, or is this person ready to go into a fight, or should we pull them back a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, and why I wanted to have a chat with you, because especially when you mentioned there about the football side of things, and I know over here with the rugby side of things, the there is that sort of route and background staff with the strength and conditioning and the tests that they need to use, whether to make them rest that week or what they need to do, which I think is an interesting point. And the work that's going forward, it's going to be quite exciting and interesting to see what's going to be happening in the future. Quite a lot of topics covered there, and a lot of food for thought. But the last question I kind of want to ask is, after everything that we've chatted about there, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom?
Okay, so the take-home is don't overthink. Make sure that you plan accordingly. Make sure that you understand the athlete as an individual. Make sure you get out there and learn on the floor if you're a new coach. Don't just rely on what you learn inside of school, but take the things that you learned in school and bridge that gap between practical learning and progressing.
Some good, I think that's a good way to think about it, that, you need to actually apply things as well. So thanks again for taking the time to chat with me. Like I say, I enjoyed chatting to the very first episode that we had, and, enjoyed catching up with you again. For everyone listening that might want to, see the content that you're putting out there, or if there's any coaches listening that might want to have a look at your mentorship program, or athletes looking to get involved in some coaching or ask you any questions, where can people find you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, so you can just go onto my website, to start the mentorship program. It's a basic program to where you understand all my methodologies, all my principles. I give you exercises. I give you module breakdowns on everything when it comes down to how I phase out each particular stage of camp. And then also we hop on a call and we do Q&As every other week. So it's good to get that community of coaches from around the world to talk to each other and converse. So that's on my website. Also,
sorry, Phil,
my programs. I got heavy hitter, fight ready, ground control. Now the new body armor program, all on there too as well. And as far as my podcast, check out my podcast, Daru Strong Podcast. Putting out episodes every week. And if you ever want to, after all of this is done and we're clear to travel, you ever want to come check me out and intern with me, just go ahead, hit the email. Okay. Yeah. So if you ever want to get in touch with me, it's phil@darustrong.com is my email. And then also DMs are usually the easiest way to get a hold of me, actually. So DM me @DaruStrong on my Instagram, and on my Twitter is @DaruStrong. So I keep it simple.
Awesome. 100%. Have a look at the content that Phil's putting out there. Really, really good. Like I mentioned at the start of the podcast. And once this all blows over and traveling goes, 100%, I'll be trying to get over. That'll be quite good. I'm sure it'll be a little bit warmer than it has been over here in the UK the past couple of days. So thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.